So we were just talking about all of the things right now, and Christy was saying, I'm so glad I am working for myself now because
Because I think that I have liberation from having to talk a party line. I've never been shy, certainly in any role I've had. I've been pretty much open in who I am. But being part of a corporation, you do need to be responsible in the roles that you're in. But I'm so glad that I'm a founder in my own business because I feel like my role at this stage of what's going on in the world is as much an activist as it is a founder of a company. We need strong voices. We need strong female voices, and we need to be calling out the absolute disrespect for humans that we're seeing on a daily basis.
Mhm.
Advocacy and activism are two different things, right? I've been an advocate my entire life. Having the freedom to actually speak out in a way that I think I saw my parents and my sisters and brothers in the '60s speak out, in the early '70s speak out on college campuses or against the Vietnam War or for women's rights, where there were real consequences. I mean, my oldest sister was arrested on her college campus because of speaking out against the Vietnam War. They were great role models. My father was an incredible role model when my sister was dating a black man, and that wasn't popular in the '60s. And my father was absolutely incredibly, both my parents, incredibly supportive of her and speaking out against civil rights and atrocities that were happening right next door to us in Newark, New Jersey. So, and I've had great role models to not only be advocates, but activists. And I just think at this day and age, when you're thinking about the role of leadership, it is not okay to sit on the sidelines as a leader today. You cannot. And as more individuals look to company leaders to solve the social and economic ills that are prevalent around us, I think leaders have to be courageous. And we've certainly seen that recently with those leaders who have said they're not giving up their DEI efforts and that they're continuing to support not only their employees, but the communities in which their companies reside. And so we need a lot more of that kind of courageous leadership.
I can imagine it's hard for leaders because also, and you've talked about this so many times, trust in leadership. It's doing a nosedive right now. And so leaders are like, okay, I want to build trust in the people that I am leading. And also, there's all of this other stuff that's going on. Like, it's overwhelming, I can imagine. It's overwhelming to lead in so many different areas of leadership. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think leadership is really hard. I think the superstorm, if you will, that leaders are faced with today with an economy that is very fluid right now. When you're looking at political issues around the globe, not just here in the US, that are completely polarized and threatening. When you look at the rise of technology, the skills shortage that we're seeing, employee disengagement at record highs, and trust in leadership at record lows, those are all things that are facing leaders today that I would say is very unique in the history of, since the industrial revolution, since the turn of the century when we moved from agricultural culture to an industrial culture. So I think that, again, leadership is really hard. As such, leaders can't be using the same playbook that they've used for their entire careers to meet the demands of this time. And those demands are equally from employees as well as customers, as well as shareholders. The stakeholders that leaders are having to face off with today is a much broader group than they ever have before. And again, it's very consequential to their business. Again, if we just look at DEI as a factor, you look at what's happening at Target. They failed to know who their customer is, right? And so they are experiencing real losses to their bottom line because of the stance that they've taken. Conversely, if you look at an Apple or a Costco, same big kind of business, you look at Costco and they're seeing record revenue because they took the time to say, and they had the courage to say out loud, our insides are going to match our outsides. That's how you build trust. If you have a commitment to purpose and to your values and you live to those purpose and values in your organizations, essentially your insides are matching your outsides. And when you do that, there is alignment with your employee base and with your customer base, and that is revenue generating.
Yeah. Okay. This is not the topic that I thought we were going to start with,
Yeah.
but since we're here,
Yeah.
let's go.
Well, where
I'm
do you want to start?
well, I mean, I think I was gonna ask, like, so you always say that you're the youngest of 7 kids, or I was gonna talk about, emotionally mature leader, but we have so much time together. We'll get to those. But while we're talking about specifically what's going on right now, and if we're using what's happening with DEI as an example, I'd love to hear your take because I find it super interesting where we live in this culture of, and I know that's like so cliche and broad to say that we live in this culture, but we do. We live in this culture of binaries where something is either all good or all bad. It's a yes, no, it's black and white. There's not a lot of middle ground or nuance. So you mentioned Target, you see what Target's doing, you see what Costco is doing. Then you have organizations like PBS, who are government funded, who PBS, they are like the OGs of
Yeah.
DEI.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
in their
Yeah. Yeah.
DNA.
That's true.
But you do see, I don't know if they just took it off the website or they said we're going to stop the initiatives. But this is who PBS is. And you hear people saying, I'm going to boycott PBS now, but they're government funded. So literally, they can't move forward with the money that they need to exist without saying, we're not going to talk about this anymore. Like, can you talk about the nuance or finesse for situations like that?
Yeah, listen, I think a lot of companies who have government contracts are particularly worried and succumbing to bullies, right? That are in the White House. And so I think that they are weighing, how do we maintain the values of DEI and code switch, right? Call it something else. I mean, I just was talking to someone today, very prominent company, financial company, who has said, "Oh, we're not giving up on DEI. In fact, we're doubling down on it, but we're calling it something different." I understand that because the question is, if we lose these contracts, people lose their jobs,
Hmm.
right?
And very important systems fail to exist anymore.
Exactly. Now, PBS isn't changing what they're saying on NewsHour. They are a shining example of being able to hold the conversation in the middle. This is a requirement of leadership today, is to be able to have the conversation in the middle. And we don't have leaders who are doing that. We have clickbait. We have these big polarized statements that companies are making or actions that they're taking without being able to say 2 things can be true, right? 2 things can be true for this company that I just referred to, this financial institution. We just yes, we gotta keep people in jobs. I mean, these are their livelihoods, right? And we have to keep the economy going because of our presence, right? And, yes, we will move away from the big DEI statements, but we are still living our values in inclusion or belonging, code switch, and here's how we're doing it. So I understand the predicament that some companies are in because of these big contracts with the government. I think that what I would like to see in having the conversation in the middle is, if you're not going to call it DEI, let's start acknowledging the humanity that exists within your organizations. What are we going to do to position individuals, employees, and thus customers, because your employees are your customers 99.9% of the time? How are we positioning the work that they do to align with the purpose of the organization and the need for human flourishing? That's not a nice to have statement or a soft statement. That is a reality to productivity.
And it's not a quick solution either, especially when we are more and more getting disconnected from not only our own humanity, but interacting with humanity, like looking at the rise of AI. And I'm not anti AI, and I know that you're not as well, because of there's nuance. There's times where AI can really, really help us. And there's, that's a whole other tangent. But when it comes back to getting back to the humanity, when I think of humanity, I think of two things. I think of the noun of the human, like the human being, like human versus robot. But then I also think of the adjectives, the qualifiers of what makes a human, because you can have a human and they can be a very robotic human. And on the other side, you can have very sophisticated AI robots that seem to be human. So when we're talking about bringing more humanity back into the workplace, the workforce, recognizing the humans, what are some of the components where you would say, yep, that's human, that's recognizing humanity? Even any examples of like how that could play out.
Well, I think there's a couple of ways that it can play out. One is let's start with AI since we began there, or robots or automation or any of that. Those are really great tools to have in the workplace. But we've got to think of them in the context of actually what they are. They're not the magic bullet that everybody says they are. AI is backward looking. It pulls from a lot of data that is historic and biased because that data is largely coming from one or two homogeneous demographics, right? So it's pulling from that. It's only as good as the questions you ask it. And it doesn't understand the context in which you are asking it, why, who's involved, where is it, what is it being used for? Those contextual competencies to understand, discern, differentiate, look at the AI in a way that needs to be contextualized itself is absolutely resident in humans. We have the ability to reason. We have the ability to understand context. We have the ability to understand how the data that comes from AI is going to impact a human being. We have to be suspicious of data that comes in a very positive way. We have to be able to ask questions around, well, is this true? How do we then ask further questions once we get analysis? Those things are uniquely human in what we call human intelligence in the book. We will always need on the side of any kind of technological advance that layer of human intelligence, which governs and which provides security and which provides context in dealing with your colleagues, your employees, your kids, your parents, whatever it is.
I want to go back and double click when you said we have to be suspicious about data in a good way. I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast and who are in this community, they're people who are leaders in their community and maybe have started up their own, whether it's consultancy or they're, freelancers or artists, or they're people who are aspiring leaders. And they're people who are like, but I want to do this right. I want to make sure that when I am leading other people, I am being the type of leader that is using that human intelligence. But the suspicion of the data, I remember a conversation that I had with someone once about fact checking. And she was like, well, who's fact checking the fact checkers? If we're talking about trust versus suspicion, where's that line when it comes to let's trust what's in front of us versus let's be suspicious? Or do we always kind of have to hold the two at the same time?
I think you do have to hold the two at the same time. The problem is the polarization that we find ourselves in today. What we are doing and what AI can give permission to if someone isn't asking the right questions to get the information or digging down on when you get a response from AI, asking more and more questions to understand it deeply, we go to contempt prior to investigation. It's this I'm right, you're wrong. The machine knows, you don't. I mean, we're constantly acting in this win lose situation, right? And so I think that investigation, suspicion, investigation is a better word for what I call suspicion, is I think we have to sit with the information and actually think about what you've read, where are the sources coming from for what you've read? I mean, listen, I use ChatGPT and thank God it gives the sources for the information I look for. I double click on those sources and then I read the sources and then I read the sources of the sources. Now, does that take time? It sure does. But it allows me to use the tool and go back and ask more clarifying questions of the tool when I'm investigating that way. I think because we are so pressured for time in our organizations to get to the right answer quickly, we are taking first response as the, Bible, as the truth. And I don't think we're investing enough time in our own development and learning to do all of those click throughs and then go back and ask again and use our own judgment, frankly, and experience in order to address issues in what I would say a 360 way.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the scene in Jerry Maguire where he's saying, "Help me, help you."
Yes,
Which
exactly.
in a lot of our organizations or even just conversations on a human to human level, so many times we want that fast answer. The world moves so fast that we feel like we can't say, "Hold on, let me take a second, let me look," or say, "I need more time." And leaders don't know how to help you if you don't tell them how to help you.
Yeah.
However, it can be really scary and really hard to tell your leaders, "Hey, I need more time," and not fear they're going to think that you're incompetent
Yeah.
or that, you're bad at time management. So how can people help those people?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a two-way street, Katie, right? I mean, we talk about this in the book when we make the argument that leadership today is failing. And it is, certainly understandable in some regards because of this superstorm that I talked about earlier. But we need leaders who have a different skill set in order to understand the humans in their organization much more deeply than they do today, and they simply don't know how to do it. So we talk about emotional maturity as a blueprint for understanding your employees so that you can help them. And so one of the things that we talk about in the flywheel model of emotional maturity is starting with this mindset of suspension of self-interest. It's not about you anymore as a leader. It's not about you making more money or, hitting your numbers or your promotion. It's about how well do you architect a team under your responsibility to actually be as productive as possible and fulfilled as possible in that equation, right? That requires a leader to have insatiable curiosity. The hallmark behavior of emotional maturity is this notion of insatiable curiosity. It's if I understand my employee, what motivates them, what drives them, what do they believe that they can contribute, and how is it best for them to contribute? What are the circumstances and the environment for them to thrive in that? What are their headwinds? Are there headwinds internally with another employee or with a group, or is it external that they've got a kid with ADHD who's failing in school, or parents that they're taking care of? What is it that is between them and doing that great job and feeling fulfilled doing it? Understanding the context in which your employees come to work, critically important. And as leaders, as we begin to put ourselves aside, have that insatiable curiosity, understand that cultural context or that context in which the employees are coming to work, then and only then do we have the opportunity to really build a culture where everyone's playing to their strengths. And we as a leader are architecting our team so that everyone's strengths are understood, transparent, where the handoffs are, where the work is best completed, and when the work is best completed. I'll tell you with my own teams, I'm an early morning person. I'm up at like 4:30, and I will start, for better or worse, start on email or start thinking through some of the creative stuff of my job. And I may send emails, but I've always said to my team, this is when I best work. And I've constructed my teams not only on their competencies, but also when do they really like to work? Because most of my old team members used to work at night. They did their best work in the evening. Well, we covered nearly the 24-hour clock because of that. And I had no expectations that they would reply to me during those crazy hours. And they knew I'd be sound asleep if they were sending me emails at night. So when we can architect our teams and a culture in that way, people will be a heck of a lot more satisfied and feel fulfilled and be more productive.
And it's rewarding as a leader too. It's
Oh, heck yeah.
rewarding to know that you are crafting that type of experience. And I think that there's a difference. I'm a words person, so I love that you have now coined the phrase emotional maturity. I'm like, that is so freaking smart because most of us, the majority of us, are very familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence. But being emotionally intelligent and being emotionally mature are two different things. Like you can be emotionally intelligent and not so emotionally mature, right?
Oh, 100%. I think that emotional intelligence is a phenomenal, phenomenal tool, concept, framework, and has absolutely served an incredible, and still does, an incredible purpose in leaders understanding themselves, understanding what are their attributes, what are their blind spots in terms of their own behavior. But that's an internal look, right? Very important, and it can be a precursor to emotional maturity, but it is very self-focused. Emotional maturity is about being other focused. It is absolutely about suspending your own interest in the interest of the team, the interest of the work that you're doing, your customers, your clients, your ecosystem partners. So while emotional intelligence gives us great markers for where we might improve on empathy or compassion or transparency or communication, really doesn't mean a hill of beans if you're not able to act on it.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was so struck by. Emotional intelligence is the thing, and emotional maturity is the thing in motion. What brought you to that term and your curiosity about what makes an emotionally mature leader? Was it an instance? Was it life experience? Or was it a like, oh, we need something else?
I will say that this term I have been playing with since back in my days at Deloitte. And some of my colleagues who are now in very impressive positions themselves, they're laughing, right? Because they're like, she finally published it.
Yeah.
You know, kind of
Yeah.
thing. I think it's been something that is really largely born out of, my dining room table growing up and seeing my parents who were incredibly emotionally mature. And then my work in working with leaders for nearly 40 years. The traits that define emotional maturity, you don't see in a lot of leaders at all, right? And there are things that they don't think about until maybe 5 years out from retirement when they start thinking about their legacy. And nine times out of 10, most people are leaders are saying, "Oh, I want my legacy to be who I mentored and people and all this kind of stuff." And it's kind of like, well, you've spent 35 years making it about you getting to a certain role and not doing those things. What makes you think that we can turn this on a dime? Now, we can begin to move that way, but this is really about leaders thinking about their legacy, or what my father would have said, reputation, from day one. And how can you serve and help others?
It makes me think of the way that you talked about how AI is it's based in the past. It looks to the past. So the and if we're going back to emotional maturity as a component of human intelligence and human-based leadership, if we're looking back, that's making us more robotic, right? So if we have emotional maturity and we are looking forward, we are thinking about legacy, reputation, I think we were talking about curiosity earlier, and I talk about curiosity so much in my work. Sometimes it's really hard to start with curiosity because it's something that is really hard to drum up out of nowhere. But if we can pinpoint legacy, reputation, what comes next as the thing that we want to figure out, like the curiosity comes from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that many leaders over the years that I've worked with have either had a hard time giving feedback, performance time, or they haven't known how to speak to somebody who's different from them, sitting across from them. How do I start a conversation if I'm a white man with a black woman? Like being frightened about that, saying the wrong thing, the kind of gotcha culture that we live in. I think curiosity is as easy as, "Hi, how are you? What are you interested in? What do you do on the weekends?" We have to, as leaders, and this is where it gets back to this hunger for humanity. What is it like when you stand on the sidelines watching your kid play soccer with another kid and the parents are talking to each other and the conversation is really easy to have? Why does that somehow change when you walk into your corporate setting and engaging with someone at work? We have to take the time to really, without your devices, without your watch going off or your phone going off, really engage in a 10-minute conversation with somebody to just say, "Hi, how are you? What's the work you're doing? Well, how did you grow up?" All of those things I think are easy to say, hard for some, but
Mhm.
we make too much of it and it becomes a barrier.
It almost makes me think of how so many people bristle at small talk. However, what they're talking about usually when they reference small talk type conversations are exactly what you just mentioned. And so, how are we ever going to build our humanity and our emotional maturity if we're not using that muscle?
Yeah. I think practice is a really smart thing. I also think just being aware. Right? I think if we as leaders are looking at how we go through a day, who we interact with, what are we saying, how are we acting? I mean, I think one of my biggest things that I hate more than anything else is going through TSA. I hate going through the TSA line. And I especially hate it when I'm randomly chosen. I could be a jerk to those people. And honestly, I'm not proud to say this. Sometimes I have been. And I've had to go back because I'm in the airport so much and make amends to people that I was rude to. I mean, that's a silly example, but when you think about in that example, when I'm thinking about why was I a jerk? It's not their fault. They're here to do their job. I need to be kind to them. They're not telling me anything I haven't known over the last 20 years of having to do this. I mean, how do I go through my daily routine or my daily life and what are those things that I'm learning through every interaction? And as small as going through the TSA line or as big as talking to a CEO, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The reality is they're the same, but they're both trying to get a job done.
Yeah. We're all humans just trying to human.
Yeah. I mean, my father used to say 2 things. He was an executive. He used to say, if I were going to meet somebody who was very senior and I was intimidated in any way, and this is earlier in my career, he used to say, "Well, they put their pants on the same way you do." I'm like, "Well, yeah, good point, Dad." Just levels playing field. And you're never too big to take out the garbage.
Yeah.
And so I really think that when we examine our behavior consistently enough, get to a point of how do we show up in the world. And one of the things that I do with leaders all the time today is ask them when I first start working with them, ask them to write their leadership obituary. That's the first exercise I ask them to do, no matter what level they are, because this gets to your own humanity. I mean, on our deathbeds, we're never talking about, oh, I'm glad I made $1 million for that company. We are talking about, well, what was the legacy I left humans? How did I treat humans, my family, all of those decisions?
It always strikes me that we only describe a life as a life well lived after people have died, you
Oh,
know?
there's no question about it. No question about it.
Yeah, and we're able to build a life well lived in the moment, but I mean, There's a part of me, I think it's, I'm an astrology person, so I think it's my Scorpio rising coming in that says that distractions are just an excuse and we all have the ability to tap into our humanity. But it's a challenging time. It's a challenging time to consistently be a human.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I mean, listen, your work gets to the heart of this in how you teach people to want themselves, right? Is you have to understand really who you are. I mean, a young woman asked me a question yesterday. I was at a conference doing presentation and she said, "How do I know what being a good leader is?" And I responded with, "Well, how do you know you're a good person?" Like, it starts with you. I could tell you to go read my book or other people's books or all of that kind of stuff. You got to filter that all through who you are first and how are you going to show up and write that promise to yourself. I think writing is an important thing to do to really reflect on what is the promise of leadership that you want to write for yourself and
Mhm.
then write your obituary.
Have you ever, especially in this season of your professional life where you are working with multiple different leaders at a time, have you ever encountered resistance toward your ideas of the importance of humanity in the workplace, of emotional maturity? Have you ever had people who are just like really not on board? And how do you talk to those people?
For sure. I mean, I think that a lot of people are very dismissive and say, it's not so much resistance to my face, although I wish it were. I can deal with that. Let's talk about it. But it's more this kind of dismissive tone of that's the soft stuff. That's just a nice to have. And the reality is, we're in an economic crisis. When you think that lack of productivity and employee engagement is costing us $8.8 trillion dollars a year, that's Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon combined in annual revenue. Think about that. That is only growing right now. You think about $322 billion a year is being lost because of burnout. And that's probably a low number because most people aren't reporting burnout. You think of 1 in 5 employees are lonely at work, and those are people who are actually physically at work who are reporting that. You think about the skill scarcity and the fact that right now in the US, we are at a employee deficit, skill deficit of 4.5 million employees in the workplace. And then by 2032, it will be 6 million. So we don't have the people to do the actual work. You add all of these things up and others, this is a true economic imperative that we have the right leadership to be able to identify and lead people in a way where they're telling us they want to be led. They want purpose, agency, wellness, and connection in their workplace. If we just keep piling on their calendar so that from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 or 9 at night, you're on Teams meetings or Zoom and you don't
Mhm.
have a second to breathe.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And they're like, oh, well, but we'll throw in an employee happy hour once a
Exactly.
month. And that's like,
Exactly.
it's another thing on the calendar.
Well, exactly, and if I don't show up at that, there's somehow gonna be
A
a
penalty.
detriment, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think that we need leaders who are leading in an emotionally mature way, but also who are able to reimagine the way work is done. I mean, we are applying, in some cases, 19th century, but 20th century models of ways of working in a 21st century world. And we're doubling down on it with this return to office. It is so outdated. No one's using 20th century technology in a 21st century world. We're all excited about the new models, the new technology, new everything, right? Yet we haven't changed the way work is done. I think that for those who are naysayers or who are dismissive, I think that they don't understand the economic crisis this is leading us toward.
If we talk about a lot of the, especially senior leadership right now, they're of older generations. And the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas are going to be those older generations one day. what can younger generations who aspire toward that type of leadership in whatever realm they're in, what can they be doing right now to not just talk the talk and walk the walk and build toward being that person, but what should they look at in the opportunities that they're presented with right now to get to that place that you so beautifully envision?
Well, first and foremost, listen, I'm a Gen Z trapped in a boomer body. I think this generation has a very, very clear identity in, frankly, emotional maturity, in understanding what really matters. And I think what we as older generations need to do is to help the younger generation know their power and advocate, validate how they see the world and fuel their optimism and their ability to change the world. I believe very strongly. I mean, I've worked in a traditional way in big corporations for, the entirety of my life. And now I'm working with probably the most enlightened leader that I've seen in Jeremy, who is really reimagining the way work gets done and doing it in a way and in a form that I would have never imagined with a bunch of fractional workers on a bunch of 1099s and never says no,
Mhm.
you know? I mean, we might have to say starting no, but
I
he's
was gonna say
no.
he maybe he
He
needs to
he
say
may
no
need to
to a
say
little
no part,
sure.
but what I've learned in working with him over the last year is so much more about how to revolutionize the way we live by revolutionizing the way we work. I mean, that's the tagline for the Humanities Studio, but he's living that and he demonstrates it. And as someone who that is not her natural tendency, it is now, but it wasn't at the beginning. It's incredibly freeing and better work is done.
Yeah, and work that is aligned with who you are and legacy and reputation. I want to talk about Humanity Studio because people might be listening and they're like, okay, this is amazing. And I'm so pumped up and so fired up. But not just how do I begin, but where are the places that are doing this? You are doing this and building this container for humanity with Humanity Studio. So, can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is just an unbelievable gift to be able to be a founder of a company that just is everything. It's the culmination of my life in one. And so the Humanities Studio is a leadership advisory and media company. So we are engaged in projects around filming and documentaries around what are essential leaders, what are emotionally mature leaders from all walks of life and all ages. Who's teaching us to be more human in the world? We are engaged in research. Research is really important to be looking at what are those new ways of working? What are those new ways of leading? What is evidence based? We've built a whole set of AI tools and assessments around the emotionally mature leader and what it means to lead in a more human way. And we work with leaders and companies, all different kinds, profit, nonprofit, to really look at how they do revolutionize the way people live, the humans in their organizations live in order to revolutionize work and how work is done and structured in a way that maximizes the productivity and fulfillment of every employee.
Mm. If people are listening and they're like, that's what I want. How do I get more involved? How do I work with the Humanities Studio? There's different ways that people can engage with you and the work that you and the Humanities Studio do, right?
100%. I mean, go to our website, thehumanitystudio.com, reach out to us. We'd
Mhm.
love to have a conversation. Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I'm to a fault very responsive. And so that's another way to engage. I encourage you to get to know us. A lot of the work that we're doing is a result of the research we did for Essential. And those are the best ways to get connected. And let's talk about how we build a better life for people at work. My personal mission has always been to solve for humanity in the workplace, because if we solve for humanity in the workplace, we solve for the communities in which those workplaces reside. Will absolutely be the engine for changing people's lives in their organizations, with their customers, and in the communities that they live. So I am hopeful that the Humanities Studio will be a shining light in
Yeah.
making that happen.
There are so many people out there who are doing wonderful work, but talk about ways to revolutionize the workplace or be more compassionate, whatever it is. They talk about it, and it's so inspiring and it's really energizing. And then it's sort of like, okay, what do I do with that? And the fact that you are going that extra step, and if we're talking about emotional intelligence being the thing and emotional maturity being the action of the thing, you are using that emotional maturity to bring those conversations to action because it can be overwhelming, personally and professionally. Like people are overwhelmed again by small talk. So the fact that you're creating a container where people can learn this stuff, I am so impressed by you and so honored to be a teeny little dot orbit in your sphere.
You are not a tiny dot orbit. You are in it with me, and I love what you do, and it complements everything that I've known and worked on my entire life, and this has been a gift, and you are extraordinarily special, and so keep using your voice, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I just told people where they could find you, so I'm not going to ask you that question. I have 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of every single podcast. You can take your time with these. The first question is, the word positivity means something different to everybody. When you think of the word positivity, what does it mean to you?
Life affirming. I think without a positive mindset, there's a lack of hope. It's dark. But positivity is something that we all must fight for. It's a right for every human.
Mm, love it. Okay. Number 2 is, when do you feel the most like yourself?
Oh my god. I mean, probably playing with my 2 dogs.
Amazing. Tell us more about
No,
about your
I
dogs.
pretty much at this stage of the game, I gotta be honest, I pretty much feel myself a lot most of the time, because I don't know how else to be, and that's probably been true for my entire career, and it's probably been good at some times and not so good at others. But I do. I feel like when with my kids, when I'm with my family and with the dogs, I just get down on the ground. I'm laughing the entire time. They crack me up. We're playing, and it's the best feeling in the world to come home from a business trip. And I mean, I barely say hello to any person in my family. I sit on the stoop and the dogs like go crazy and jump all over me. And I'm like,
It's the
this feels really
best.
good.
It's the
Yeah.
be it's the
Well,
best
dogs,
feeling.
yeah. I mean, dogs know if you're good or you're bad. They just know.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's studies around that too about how they can literally sense how you're feeling. Okay. Final question. There's a little bit of context here. I define fearlessness as not feeling the fear and doing it anyway necessarily, but fearlessness is when the fear you have, the situation, the thing, whatever, is less than the faith you have in yourself. So fearless is when the fear is less than the faith. Given that equation, Christie Smith, what makes you feel fearless?
pretty much everything right now. I can't afford to waste my voice by being self conscious or fearful. Too much is at stake. Bring it on.